this is PK Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my non-spoiler review of Dune Part 2. Released theatrically worldwide on Friday the 1st of March 2024, it has a highly established ensemble cast featuring the likes of Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Florence Pugh, Josh Brolin, Austin Butler, Javier Bardem, Dave Batistua, Rebecca Ferguson, Stellan Skarsgård, Lea Seydoux and Christopher Walken, and it was directed once more by Denis Villeneuve. It is of course a sequel to Dune Part 1, the 2021 big budget adaptation of Frank Herbert's classic science fiction novel from 1965. Adapting the outline from the book, the movie is set in the far distant future, consisting of noble factions across the galaxy. We follow young teenager Paul Atreides from the House Atreides as his family is sent to the sand planet of Arrakis by the Emperor, looking to import the mysterious substance known as the spice. As well as being the source for interstellar space travel, the spice can also provide mental powers and abilities and expand somebody's lifespan. The planet is extremely hazardous due to the presence of giant sandworms, which can be ridden by the planet's inhabitants known as the Fremen. Now, the end of Dune Part 1 saw Paul joining the Fremen in order to not only bring peace, but also come to terms with the various visions of the future that he constantly has, as well as the potential role and destiny as being the planet's protector and also the Messiah. Now, Dune Part 2 also sees the Imperious Emperor Chalamet IV escalate the pursuit of the spice alongside houses both Harkonnen and the Bene Gesserit, as the Fremen continue to look to Paul to be their ultimate saviour. Now, going into Dune Part 2, there's been somewhat of a high level of hype and excitement after the first film, which whilst was complimented for its serious scope and visuals, was deemed by some to be overlong and a bit dull and lacking appealing characterisation, all things that I felt when watching the movie. But does Dune Part 2 really justify all of the big adulation that it's getting right now? Is it much superior to Part 1? Is it really this all-conquering masterpiece that so many of the early reviews have deemed it to be? Well, having seen the film, I can tell you right now the answer is no. Whilst it has all of the scope, the effects, the scale, the music, it actually ends up being an empty, overstuffed blockbuster that outside all of the aesthetics just fails to connect on both a character and emotional level. The more I continue to reevaluate it, the more of a disappointment the movie becomes. Now, don't get me wrong here, the film was far from terrible, not by any means. There's actually a lot here to be applauded, but because it potentially has all of the parts here for something to be truly great, this is what compounds the disappointment even more so. And director Denis Villeneuve just doesn't manage all of these elements in the right way, and this is yet another movie that highlights his visual flair, but also exposes once more his lack of storytelling. Now, as mentioned before, this is not a bad movie. In comparison to Part 1, it's probably superior, yes, because there are probably a lot more involving elements this time around in terms of we get more characters, more backgrounds, more hints at more story, even though the film doesn't really follow through on all of these elements. Once more, the best parts are the effects, and yes, at times, there is a real sense of a massive scale here. The movie goes all out to present the world of Arrakis as this really vast planet of landscapes and skylines, and of course lots of desert, which after a while does lose its luster, because everything kind of feels just the same from a visual standpoint, far and away from the multitude of different environments when exploring Lord of the Rings Middle-earth. And for all of the visual flair here, we once more get that really faded contrast in terms of the overall look of the film, and it can at times make it a bit more bland, lacking real vivid energy, especially at the halfway point where for some reason we decide to delve into full black and white during the gladiatorial sequences. Once more we have the incessant Hans Zimmer musical score, which does land well on the more emotional tones and character dynamics, but again we get these overblown horns and wailing voices and grinding washing machine like noises, and it really does take you out of the action at times. And much like the first film, we easily could have trimmed at least an hour of its runtime, and like Zack Snyder, Villeneuve just gets too immersed in all of the montages and dream sequences and slow motion, almost as if he's filming much more of a visual exhibition rather than telling a natural story, and the pacing of the film suffers because of it. When we talk about the best part, which was the first third, where we see Paul working to convince the Fremen that he's really worthy to lead them, learning to ride the sandworms in a very good sequence, and also seeing the relationship between both him and Chani, that's when the film really was the most involving and the most engaging, even though again we could have easily trimmed at least 10 to 15 minutes of this part of the film. It's when we move into the middle section and we start expanding on the other parts of the galaxy and the other characters especially when we start talking about the villains who were all extremely weak and lackluster. This is when the film really starts to drag, when it should have been really picking up the momentum. Whether it's Austin Butler's Freya Ruther coming in all black and white gladiatorial contest, which was a very strange choice as I mentioned before, Stellan Skarsgård's Baron or Dave Batista's Rabin, they all feel extremely nerfed and constantly overwhelmed and outsmarted and outmatched, and it really was strange to see, especially when we have the sequel here that was really meant to up the stakes and increase the amount of peril and jeopardy this time round. And in terms of the villains, if you like, the biggest letdown without question was Christopher Walken's Emperor. One of the all-time great actors. When he was originally cast in this role, I was actually quite excited because I thought we were going to get this all-dominant, all-imposing personality with a real sense of purpose and figure, very much encompassing this film like a proper boss. But he's barely in the film, and again, when he is involved, he's nothing special at all. Looking very frail and weak for the most part, he lacks the stature and influence that we really should see from the Emperor. And we look at all of the other substantial actors, whether it's Florence Pugh, Seydoux or Josh Brolin. Honestly, all of these characters could have been completely taken out of the film, and the film wouldn't have been any worse off for it. Now, I do understand that certain characters were brought in now to set up potentially more expanded roles for Part 3, but I really hate this tactic of giving us bite-sized introductions only to be introduced later on down the line. At the end of the day, this is meant to be a standalone movie experience. We're not watching a mini-series here, so we really should be concentrating on characters that are most integral for Part 2 and leaving any potential characters who are more important for Part 3 for indeed Part 3. Now, in terms of other characters, I think the best standouts were Javier Bardem's Stilgar, whose presence really comes through and carries the first third of the film before he drifts in and out of it later on. We then have Zendaya's Cheney, who starts off very likeable and appealing as the actress herself, but the character really descends as the story goes on into the much more typical angry, entitled female archetype that we've seen far too often in modern films today. And she actually ends the film being far less likeable than what she was at the start of it. Now, as Paul Atreides, I think Timothée Chalamet is fine. I think again he fares far better in the far more quieter moments, the more intimate dynamics, in particular with Zendaya. He doesn't fare quite as well when he starts going into the all-powerful, all-shouty and speechifying leader of the Fremen. But overall, again, I think it's an adequate performance. And as for Rebecca Ferguson's Lady Jessica, again, nothing wrong with her performance, but I really did find myself questioning what exactly her role was throughout the story. I do understand that she's a major part of the source material, but once more, it really felt like her role could have been reduced, which would have again trimmed off a lot of the film's runtime. And as the film enters its final third, they really do force through the story. We get big revelations regarding certain characters that should have a real impact and impression, but it just sped through as we want to hurtle towards the big climatic battle and action and spectacle. But very much like the movie itself, nothing here really captivates you. Nothing here really gets you on the edge of your seat to really get you engaged throughout what's going on throughout the story. It just feels like everything is just thrown together, and as we enter towards the last 15 to 20 minutes, it just ends up being a real setup for Part 3, which I'm sure we'll get later on down the line. And the film becomes far less and less engaging as it went on, and to be honest, I became more and more frustrated just because I was far less interested, and dare I say again, much like Part 1, a bit bored with the overall story. So overall, Dune Part 2 is not bad. It certainly has a lot to show on screen, and at least there's been a big effort to again try and tell something truly epic and truly substantial. But once more, like the first film, it truly lacks that emotional and character resonance to really pull you into the story. Again, all of the visuals, whilst good to look at on screen, eventually lose their luster, and the film itself has a very kind of one-note blandness about it that really leaves you more indifferent as the film goes on. And once more, a truly overextended and expanded runtime. I look at both Dune Part 1 and Part 2, and both films easily could be merged into one singular 2.5 hour movie, which probably would have made it a far more rewarding experience. So overall, not the masterpiece, not the genre-defining movie that everybody has been painting it out to be. This is not the game changer. This is definitely not the next Lord of the Rings, definitely not the next Star Wars. I just think overall this is an adequate, big epic sci-fi blockbuster, very serious in its tone, but much less engaging and imaginative as what we'd expect a film of this caliber to be. And overall for me, sadly, it is a big overhyped disappointment. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings on Dune Part 2. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I will surely be uploading my spoiler review when I will go into far more depths into the elements of the film that I think worked well, and the elements that I think didn't work quite as well, and whether there is actually any investment to go forward and see what would happen for any potential Dune Part 3 later on down the line. So look out for all that content in the future, and if you have any other topics or movies or television series that you'd like to see me review in the future, then let me know in the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very, very soon.